Hi. Okay. We are going to start our new book today. And this is Buddy by M.H. Herlong. And as you can see, the laundry is going on behind me, but that's cool. So here we go. Chapter 1. This should be very interesting. It's about a boy, a dog, and Hurricane Katrina. It is 300 pages long, just about. And I'm trying to figure, and 37 chapters, but they're not really long, so. Here we go. Buddy. We found Buddy in the middle of St. Roch Avenue at 8:45 on a Sunday morning. That's the way Grandpa T would start this story. It was early April, he'd say, the spring of 2005. That's so, somebody else would say. It's a fact, Grandpa T would say, and then he'd nod his head. I'm going to tell you a story about a dog, a three-legged dog, and a little black boy with no more sense than God gave a grasshopper. But Grandpa T ain't telling this story. I'm telling it. So this story is in first person. My name is Tyrone Elijah Roberts, just like my daddy and Grandpa T before him. Everybody calls Daddy T Jr. Everybody calls me Lil T. So this story starts up in the car. We're on our way to church. It's hot in the car and we're crowded. Daddy's driving and Mama's sitting in the front seat fanning herself. I'm squeezed in between them and looking at my Game Boy. I'm about to make it to the next level. My little sister's in the back playing the fool with the baby. She's shaking these big old plastic keys in front of his face saying, "Grab 'em. Come on, baby Terrell. You can do it." And Grandpa T's sitting beside the baby seat, leaning back with his mouth open like he's sleeping. But he ain't sleeping. He's just gone someplace he goes when he don't like where he is. We need a bigger car, T Jr., Mama says. Daddy don't say nothing. Little T's almost 13 years old. Pretty soon his feet are going to be sticking out the front window. Oops, sorry, that was Mama talking. Little T's almost 13 years old. Pretty soon his feet are going to be sticking out the front window. Daddy still don't say nothing. And when Tommy and Terrell both get bigger, it's going to be way too crowded in this old car. I already said. Daddy starts up. We'll go looking when I get that increase at work. It don't help to bring it up now. Mama casts her eye at Daddy. Then she sighs. It's so hot, she says, and it's only April. Daddy nods, and I miss my shot, and it's game over. We're riding by the Tomato Man. It's too early for good tomatoes, but he's out there selling other stuff just like he does every Sunday morning. What's he got for sale today? Mama says. Daddy leans forward a little bit and says, Sign says collard greens. I don't want any collard greens, Mama says. And then all of a sudden, Daddy slams on the brakes and Mama screams. And I'm bending forward toward the dashboard. Mama's arm slams into my chest and those plastic keys come flying over the seat and smack the back of my head. And the baby starts crying and Grandpa T sits up straight and says something I can't write down in this story. Then the whole world's still. We're sitting in the hot car and the baby's crying. And Mama finally says, What was that, T Jr.? Daddy says, I think I hit a dog. Daddy climbs out of the car first. He opens the door and it creaks like it's going to fall off, but it don't. He looks up toward the front of the car. "Oh, Lord," he says. And I'm crawling out his door while Mama's grabbing at my leg saying, "Wait!" But one thing I ain't doing is waiting. It's a black dog. A black dog with long, straight fur. He's laying flat on the street. His tail is stretched out behind him, and he's still as a stone. I kneel down in the street right beside him. "Be careful," Daddy says, but he don't stop me. "Hey, boy," I say. I reach out my hand toward the dog, reach real slow, and touch his head just a little bit. "Easy now, easy," I say. The dog twitches, and then all of a sudden he lifts up his head and looks straight at me. "He's alive," Daddy shouts, and everybody starts piling out the car to come see. That dog don't take his eyes off me. He's looking at me like he's wondering who I am, and I'm looking right back. His eyes are soft and big and dark brown, with black going all around the rims. He's got a sprinkling of white fur across his forehead and down the top of his nose, sort of in the shape of a heart. Everybody's crowding around, but me and that dog are still looking at each other. He's got a long, thin scar over one of his eyes. The fur around the scar goes every which way, making him look like he's got a buck moth caterpillar stuck on his forehead. Under his chin and down his throat, the fur is mostly white. One front paw is supposed to be white, too, but he's so dirty it looks almost brown. "He sure is dirty," Mama says. She's standing there with her hands on her hips, and Tanya's hanging on her like she might fly away. Grandpa T bends down and looks at the dog and says, "His hind leg is broke." "How do you know that?" Daddy says. "I use my eyes," Grandpa T says, and points. And sure enough, anybody can see. The top back leg is kind of covering it up, but once you look, you can see the other back leg is bent the wrong way, and there's something white sticking out through the fur. That dog's leg ain't just broke. It's broke bad. I'm rubbing the dog's head now. He started panting like nobody's business laying there on the hard street in the hot sun where the shadow from the oak trees ain't even close to him. I can feel the hard bone under his soft fur, and the way his skin moves a little when I push my hand over the round top of his head. His eyes stretch open, and I curl my fingers into the thick fur on his neck. I bend down and touch the top of the dog's head with my nose. He smells like dog sweat and old, wet leaves and dry dust, all at the same time. "Be careful, little T," Mama says. "Ain't nothing to worry about," Grandpa T says. "That's one gentle dog." "You can't tell that," Daddy says. He's still half knocked out." Grandpa T just shrugs his shoulders. "What's your name?" I whisper to the dog. He sticks up his tongue and licks my chin. I must taste good because he does it twice. But then he shifts a little and his broke leg moves and he yelps and starts to wiggle like he wants to get up. "Easy, boy," I say. "Easy." And he settles right down again and lays still. "What are we going to do, Daddy?" I say. Daddy's standing there wiping his face with a tissue. Grandpa T's leaning on the side of the car with his arms crossed over his chest. Mama looks over at the Tomato Man down the road. "Whose dog is this?" she yells. Tomato Man's standing up under his umbrella. He's looking at us like we're a movie show. "Ain't nobody's," he hollers back. "Just a street dog." "But who feeds him?" Mama yells. Tomato Man shrugs up his shoulders. Mama looks down at the dog. "Doesn't look like anybody feeds him," she says. The baby's crying in the car. Tanya's twisting her feet in her sandal shoes and wrinkling up Mama's dress in her hand. Mama looks at her and watch and says, "We're going to be late for church." "He needs a doctor," Grandpa T says. "We can't pay for no pay a doctor for no dog, Daddy says. But somebody's got to help him, Grandpa T says. Well, we can't take him with us, Mama says. There's not enough room in the car. We can't just leave him here either. We can't just leave him here neither, Daddy says. I'm still kneeling down by the dog. Now he's resting his head in the palm of my hand, and I'm thinking that my hand is going to smell just like dog. Just like this dog. I look up at all those people fussing, and I don't even think about it. All of a sudden, I just blurted out. There'll be plenty enough room, I say, if I walk. Every one of them stops talking. They all look down and stare at me. Put the dog in the back, I say. Tanya can take my seat. Somebody at church will know what to do. You're going to walk to church, Daddy says. He's not old enough to do that, Mama says. This neighborhood. How old are you, boy? Grandpa T says. 13 next October, I say. I was picking cotton when I was your age, Grandpa T says. He turns to Mama. I think he can walk 5 blocks to church. T. Jr., put that dog in the car. Standing in this heat ain't good for my heart. When Grandpa T says what to do, everybody does it. Mama's mouth is all screwed up like she's sucking a lemon, but she don't say nothing. She buckles Tanya into the front seat and sticks a pacifier in the baby's mouth so he stops crying. Okay, dog, Daddy says, I'm going to pick you up and you ain't going to bite me. We got a deal? That dog's looking at Daddy like he ain't too sure about this deal. Daddy squats down and slowly starts to work his arms up under the dog. Grandpa T's helping with the broke leg. The dog twists his head back and forth like he's trying to look at both of them at the same time. When Daddy lifts him up off the ground, the dog makes a noise like a squeaky toy and then a yelping sound. Daddy makes a sound too like, ugh. He's bony, Daddy says, but he's heavy enough. That dog is whimpering and wiggling like he wants to get away, but then Daddy hustles him into the car. The dog takes up all of Tanya's seat and more, his front feet passing up under the baby's seat and his head almost laying in the baby's lap. That dog is looking at baby Terrell, but I can't stop looking at the dog. At first I think his big old eyes are sad and scared because he's hurt and maybe because he's hungry. Next I think they're glad and happy because he's out of the sun, and maybe because he thinks we're going to feed him. Then he settles his head down and turns his eyes on Mama. You watch that dog with my baby, Grandpa T, Mama says. If he takes even a little nip, I'll throw him out on the street, broke leg and all. He ain't going to bite baby Terrell, I say. Just look at his eyes. Mama gives me a look. You don't know anything about that dog, she says. I know that much, I say. Huh, Mama says. Then they're all in the car and the doors slam shut. Daddy leans out the window. Keep on walking down this street, son, till you get to St. Claude. Turn left and go on until you see the church. We'll be inside, looking for you. I nod. They drive off. What are you going to call that dog? Tomato Man hollers. What makes you think I'm going to call him anything? Tomato Man laughs and picks up his newspaper. I know what I know, is all he says. And that's the end of chapter 1. I think I'll go on to chapter 2. I hope you're liking this story. Yep, I think I'll do chapter 2. So here we go, chapter 2. I started up wanting a dog the day after I was born. At least that's what I always tell people. We were living in a double, and my best friend Jamila and her aunt were living on the other side. For extra money, Mama was making pralines to sell out of the house and watching Jamila, while Jamila's aunt was at work. We played on the front porch every day, and I remember every single dog that ever walked by. And there were a lot. When I was about 5 or 6, a boy down the street named Melvin had a yellow dog that chased a ball. Every day when Jamila and me got home from school, we watched him walk out with that dog and head to the park. We asked if we could come, but he said we were too little. I told Jamila I wanted a dog, just like that. She drew me one on a piece of paper and said, "Here." Mama stuck it up on my wall and said, "That dog almost looks alive." I was thinking it was a good picture, but it wasn't that good. When I was 7 years old, I told my daddy I wanted a dog. Mama was walking around with a great big stomach, and Daddy said, "We can't have a dog. We're going to have a baby." I said, "I want a dog, not a baby." Daddy said, "You don't get to choose." When I was 9 years old, I told my daddy I still wanted a dog, and he said, "We got a toddler baby now. We ain't got room for a dog." When I was 10 years old, we moved down the street to live with Grandpa T. He said he had a big old empty house and couldn't work anymore because of his heart trouble. And what were we doing paying rent anyway? Mama had started cooking up lunches to sell too, so she could use a bigger kitchen. And to tell the truth, Grandpa T wasn't as strong as he ought to be. Jamila's drawing got all ripped up when we took it off the wall. She said she would do another one, but I said, "Don't worry about it. We got a yard now, even though there ain't hardly no grass." So I told my daddy when we had enough room now, and I still wanted a dog. But he said times were hard, and he didn't have the money to feed a dog. When Mama's stomach got big again, I knew there wasn't no point saying I wanted a dog. We were going to have another baby, and there wasn't no money, no more money than there was before. And since Christmas, there ain't even been as much. Jamila and her aunt just up and moved. One day when the aunt came by after work to get Jamila, Mama started up showing off the little plastic bags she had just bought to put her pralines in. Each bag was just big enough for one praline, and each one said, "Mama's pralines," and in this pinky red color. Mama took about 2 hours to pick out. She had just bought boxes and boxes of them, plus 2 rolls of ribbon to tie them shut. The aunt was standing there nodding and saying how nice that was going to look. Then all of a sudden she'd stopped nodding and she said, "I need to tell y'all something. We're moving to Chicago. I got a better job. It'll be a better school. We're leaving this weekend." We were just standing there staring at her, and then she said, "Y'all have been good to Jamila for 10 years, and you're like family, but we have to go." But just before Jamila walked out the door, she turned around and waved. "I'll write you a letter, little T," she said, "and then you can write me back." And that's the last time I ever talked to her. So then there was nobody to ride the bus with, and nobody to do my homework with, and nobody to keep Tanya off when I wanted to play my Game Boy. Mama had spent all her money on those little plastic bags, and she didn't have anybody extra to babysit, just Tanya and Terrell. And you don't get money for babysitting your own children. I knew there wasn't no way in the world they were ever going to let me have a dog of my own. Then Melvin's yellow dog from down the street ran off, and I didn't even have somebody else's dog to look at anymore. I went in my room and lay down on my bed and didn't move for about a week. I just stared at the ceiling and thought that I should have let Jamila draw me one more picture, because then at least I'd have that instead of nothing at all. So now I'm walking on past the tomato man down the street toward the church. I'm thinking about how it's been over 3 months and Jamila still ain't wrote me a letter. I'm getting sweaty in my Sunday clothes and my shoes are getting dusty. And then I start thinking about how that dog just put his nose in the palm of my hand. I started thinking about his big old eyes looking up at me. I start thinking about his broke leg and the way his ribs were sticking up when he was laying on his side. I hold my hand up to my face and I smell his smell all over again. Dog sweat, dry dust, and old wet leaves. Then I remember how the preacher always says nobody knows what God's plans might be. So I decide right then and there I'd better make a plan of my own. I look up at the sky just once, and then I get busy. I walk in at the church and when they're singing loud and they're swaying. The choir starts clapping their hands and everybody joins in. I walk down the aisle to where my family's standing. They're singing with the rest of them. When they see me, Grandpa T leans over to Mama and says, "Told you." But she don't look too happy about it. I squeeze in beside Daddy, and Tanya leans around and looks up at me and smiles real big. That girl sure is all teeth when she grins. When the song is done, we all sit down and the preacher starts talking about the meetings and committees and who's supposed to do what. But I'm thinking about the dog and wondering where he is. I poke Daddy and whisper in his ear. Daddy points, and then I see him. He's laying up against the wall at the end of the aisle. Somebody's put a bowl of water by him, but now his head is down, and he looks like he's asleep. I start to get up, but Daddy puts his hand on my arm and makes me stay put. While I'm looking at that dog, he lifts up his head and sees me. I swear I see his tail go thump. Then we come to the time when the preacher asks us to share our problems. Mrs. Washington is still worried about her nephew in Iraq, and we all pray for him. Mr. Boudreaux says his daddy is down in his back. He can't work, and all he does now is sit in his dark room watching TV and saying nobody needs him anymore. So we all pray for Mr. Boudreaux's daddy. One little girl stands up and says she's worried about her cat because it ain't come home in 3 days. We pray for the cat. Then I poke Daddy. He points to Grandpa T, who's already standing up. Grandpa T says he's got a story to tell, but he don't know how it ends. He says that's where he needs the help. He says we are driving in the car to church this morning, and the family's all squeezed in because the car's too small, and we can't buy another one. We ain't got the money. And the people say, uh-huh, or I know all about that. Then Grandpa T says, we hit a dog, wham! And he claps his hands together so loud Tanya jumps. The people suck in their breath and say, mercy! Grandpa T's standing there looking at his feet, shaking his head. He says this story would be over if that dog had died, but that dog didn't die. Praise God, somebody says. That dog is laying right over there, Grandpa T says, and he points. All the heads turn. That dog lifts up his head and looks back at the people. I swear he looks like he's about to cry. Grandpa T says the dog's got a broke leg. He says it's in pain. He says it's hungry. The dog puts his head back down. He closes his eye. He turns his face to the wall. That dog is one of God's creatures, Grandpa T says. We hurt him, and we don't have the money to help him. So how's this story going to end? How are we going to help that dog? Like the good Lord says we ought to. Sweet Jesus, somebody sings out in the back. The preacher says, how are we going to help Brother Roberts? And Mr. Nelson from the country stands up and he says, his daughter works for a veterinarian and he'll help us get the dog there in his truck. And Ms. Washington with the nephew in Iraq stands up and she says she can give $1 to help pay. And then other people stand up and say they can too. And before you know it, somebody's passing a plate and the dollar bills are rolling in. And we're all singing again. And I'm thinking, maybe God does make his own plan. But so far, it looks pretty much the same as mine. And that's the end of chapter 3, too. Oh, my goodness. Looks like Little T is going to get him a dog. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and grant you peace. See you next time. Bye.